A paper released by one of the professors in Ashoka University has created quite a storm. The paper is titled Democratic Backsliding in the World's Largest Democracy, and it's written by Dr. Sabyasachi. Although the university has distanced itself from the findings of the paper, social scientists and academia members from the academia have said that the findings needs to be looked at far more critically. Joining us today, we have Dr. Debendu Mathi from, he's an assistant professor from the Delhi School of Economics, and Dr. Chandrachur Singh, associate professor of politics at the Hindu College. So if I could begin with Dr. Singh, so the findings of the paper, especially it says that, he actually associated some electoral malpractices in the 2019 elections, and he has associated with the ruling party. So how do you see the overall findings of the paper?
Well, that my understanding is that research papers and particularly empirical papers, when you write a paper, you get into some data, and analyzing data is not always easy, because if you remember, there's always something which is called the problem of empiricism or the problem of induction, which is to say that if A is equal to B, does it mean that all the A's are equal to all the B's? So probably there are deviations, and I remember reading that paper, and I found that the paper itself is not very pronouncing in terms of the thing that it wants to say. I mean, there's one thing in saying that, well, this might be there, and then the other thing is, and that it is actually there. So I think the paper is in a gray zone. It doesn't really say that there were electoral malpractices. It doesn't really say that the BJP tried to rig the elections. It falls short of saying that, and yet tries to indicate that, right? So I think this is a typical way of playing in the gray area by pointing out to something which is not evidently proven. The paper itself says that this might be also because of an X or Y or Z reason. So he's neither giving a reason nor is trying to say this in very certain terms. What is more interesting is the fact that the paper indicates that there might have been some electoral malpractices, and then goes on to say that these electoral malpractices did not happen in any other elections. So I think the paper is a bit mischievous, I would say that, in terms of looking at London and aiming at Tokyo. So that is what I would say, looking at the in the first glance itself.
Okay, if I could get Professor Mathi at this point, sir, basically when he spoke about the electoral malpractices, he actually said that in constituencies where the fight was actually very, very narrow, where the fight was very strict between both the parties, or BJP and the other parties. In those constituencies, BJP somehow managed to emerge victorious. So, although these seats are very little, but does it indicate towards a larger trend?
So let me confess that I haven't read the paper thoroughly, but I have definitely gone through. So I cannot give you the specific answer. But the point I would like to highlight that the electoral malpractice is there in the system for long. And whether somebody has caught it or got the data to prove or not, but this is there. This is in the systems. And if you call really the systems called, whatever we want to say, let's say, quote and unquote capitalist system. So that means whatever the kind of business that you think of, if you are in the power, you would like to use the power for an incumbency. This is already there. Before independence, we all know 1936 Congress, election, Subhash Chandra won. But even in spite of the fact that Subhash Chandra Bose was won, but he was criticized in such a way he was asked to resign. So the point I was saying, when as more and more crises being faced by the systems, more ethically, morally, we are actually values are being degraded, and as a result, by hook and crooks, election, the incumbency party would always try to employ his power to go for the incumbency. So this is whether it is visible or not, that is there. So let's say if I want to penetrate or to get the vote, even if that goes against your ideology, you will try to manipulate it. That's there in the systems. And so, as I did mention, and I may not be able to in a position to exactly comment the point you said. But of course, whenever any political party will see there has been tough contest, of course they will always be prepared to do kind of manipulation, or let's say campaign in such a way so that the majority of voters should be casted in favor of them. That would be definitely objective of the campaign party.
Dr. Singh, when he talks about electoral malpractices, he does not specially refer to the Election Commission. What he says in the paper is that the party might have been able to use the local factors, the local factors at the local booth level or the constituency level to make the elections in its favor. But he does not underline the overall role of the EVM. He does not underline the overall role of the Election Commission. So how do you read this reading of his finding?
Well, a good paper is one which says one thing at one time. If you look to this paper, as I said, this paper claims to be empirical, but I think it's basically conjectural. I mean, if you look to the things that the paper says, it at one hand says, well, the close contest might have been there, it might have been rigged, it might have been manipulated. It might not have been manipulated. This might have been because of, the party's well-oiled electoral system, because of booth-level workers. It says a lot of things, Siddharth.
Right.
It does not, as I said, it is just looking to London, talking Tokyo. It's not about things which are claimed. One of the things that we say in classrooms is that a scientific argument is one which is very clearly causative. I don't think this argument is causative. Mind you, Rajiv Gandhi had a landslide victory in 1984. Does it mean that the elections were rigged? Give it to Narendra Modi. If he has won an election, he's won an election, right? And therefore, when you don't have any argument to make, you somehow cobble up some data. And which are these? And where does this data come from? Is it coming from the field work? Is it coming from the websites? Is it coming from the digital world? Where is the data coming from? If it is coming from some authentic source, why is it that the paper stops or shies away from saying what it basically wants to say? Have the courage to say that the election is...
Mr. Singh, if I was to intervene at this point, why this dichotomy? In one hand, you were saying that the machinery might have been used to rig the system, and he has actually given two supporting points. On the other hand, he says that it might not be a foolproof way to say that it has been rigged. So why is this dichotomy? Is it a sign of saying that it is not foolproof?
This is a typical way of creating confusions in the society. And, I would rather say this is a good example of rigging the minds of the people by creating doubts. In fact, world over, even a hardcore Marxist analytical writings on Indian politics says in the electoral system in India is fair enough, particularly in the last 2 decades. So, casting aspersions simply by clouding of data is something that I would say scholars must stay away from. It is not to say that scholars must not critique. Critique is one thing, but casting aspersions by clouding the data is...
Rightly pointed out, Dr. Singh, scholars must critique because it is a part of the public discourse. But where do you draw the line? A critique and a research paper that very succinctly highlights the issues on ground. So how do you draw the line?
I think the little that I understand of electoral systems, I can tell you this world over, when there is a wave going on, the floating votes, particularly the people who have not decided which way to vote, ultimately end up voting the way the wave moves in. So I think it's a typical case if there are close contests, and in the close contests in certain constituencies, if the BJP has won, then it's basically because in those close contest constituencies, normally the indecisive voter tends to vote towards the party which it sees winning. So because nobody wants to waste the vote. Now that might be, again, as I said, if a paper is based on conjecture, the way that I can answer is also going to be conjectural. So these are that is why scientific research is something which must very evidentially and very clearly say what it wants to say. I think in this paper, the attempt is to tarnish the electoral system, create confusion amongst the electorate, and cast aspersion on a political party led by the Prime Minister. So I don't see this paper good enough to be even taken seriously. It is a conjectural paper, should never be taken seriously. I can say this.
So, Mr. Mathi, would you respond to what Mr. Singh is saying? Because earlier you have pointed out that electoral malpractices have always been happening. Maybe in certain form or the other, maybe in certain in variation or the other, but electoral malpractices have been happening. That's what you said earlier, right?
Yeah. I mean, my point was that state who in the power would like to, do something. Of course, that should actually go in favor of them. This is definitely is there. In practice, in some of the states, which is much more very visible, even I would say recent panchayat election in West Bengal, which is quite visible. This is also in VR. In some election, it is also visible. But now, if you talk about the specifically this election, now let's say, of course, you can say that this the BJP might have used power to motivate the systems. That I mean, I did not read the paper. I cannot really argue whether the data that is the manufacturer or I cannot argue that. But at the same time, it could also be true the credibility of opponent. So opponent party was not that credible enough to actually, get the minds of the floating voters. This is also true. This is at least you look at the opponent dominant.
No, what you're saying is that the opposition party, that the opposition parties that were contesting in 2019 vis-a-vis the BJP, they were not strong enough to capture the floating votes. That's what you're saying.
The elections, I'm telling you. First point I made that of course all the political party, whoever in the power, would try to use their power in favor of their election. Whatever may they, this is true always. Now at the same time, and that these become much worse as the competitions is going up, or let's say overall the ethics culture is actually being degraded, and that's why it is, even if this is not ethical, still to get the power, they pamper the unethical activities as well. But on top of that, what I said in the context of this election, and dominant or the opposition party was not enough to get the mind of the floating data. So that is also true.
Yeah, so that's exactly what Dr. Singh also pointed out, that
to be honest, I don't totally blame the way, let's say, the author has said that the elected malpractices was the only responsible get the win for the.
Although he did not arrive at that conclusion but sorry.
So he's not concluding that way, Professor.
Right, exactly.
Trying to hint towards that, and I think that is dangerous.
Right. That's exactly what I was saying. Although he has not conclusively arrived at that conclusion, but he has actually left it open-ended. Seeking people to respond in a certain way, to understand the paper in a certain way. Yeah.
If that is the true, of course, at the end of the day, research paper should not actually give you anything inconclusive. Of
This is
course,
a
you
very
can also
interesting
raise
point.
it.
This is a very interesting point that you have raised, Dr. Mehti. If I could ask Dr. Singh, what is Dr. Singh? We have been talking about research papers and so on and so forth. So, at a very fundamental, at a very basic level, what is the very purpose of a research paper?
See, a research paper must contribute to knowledge. And a good research paper is not one which says so many things in one go.
Yeah.
A research paper should highlight something which is new. It must contribute to knowledge, but at the same time, the contribution to knowledge must be normatively or empirically substantiated. In this case, there's no normative argument to be made, because this is basically a statistical analysis, and a statistical analysis will always be prone to error. Even if there is 1% or 2% error, margin of error, that paper may just simply get into a different zone altogether. And I know it also happens in electoral, particularly studying in psychology. What happens is 1 or 2% of swing of votes this way or the other would, end up, transforming the result altogether. So
Right.
I think students of politics particularly, and I don't think that gentleman is from political background. He's just an economist.
Yeah, he is a professor of economics, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when you have numbers, you need to match those numbers with also procedural practices and institutional norms. So I think if that had been done, that paper would have been more substantive. At this time, I can only say that the paper is indicative, but what it is indicating is something which is very clouded and very obscure.
So, Mr. Mehti, due to paucity of time, if I could just ask you one last question. The university has very clearly distanced itself from the paper. It says that this is author's own research, this is author's own findings, and whatever has been hinted in the paper, we don't want to be associated with this. Now, how do you look at this when some research takes place at an institution or under an institution? How fair is it for an institution to distance itself, no matter what the findings are?
I'm a researcher. I do research. Of course, whatever I find based on, let's say, the data or the model, I try to say. Of course, it may sometimes go for incumbent government. It may also go against them. I don't find any kind of fear. Of course, that should be scholars should get that kind of freedom and autonomy wherever they work. Now, if that is the case, then of course this also indicates that probably there has been a bit of problem in the incumbent government. Mm-hmm. Why should actually incumbent government will create a kind of terror among the scholar, or let's say try to create some kind of fears among the scholar or the administration, or instruct administration not to publish or encourage the research which may also go against some of the government. So for the particular paper, Professor Singh might have said that rightly that he doesn't have that much credibility to argue. That could be definitely one criticism. I can also buy this argument, but the freedom has to be there. Freedom should be given to the institution, or institutions should make sure that the scholar should get sufficient freedom express their mind.
I think that I'm really sorry, Professor, but I think it's very important to understand that institutions cannot own those papers or cannot simply go against them. See, for example, the columns that I write for newspapers, you see that below that I write and I say that this is my personal opinion.
Right.
So I think institutional neutrality requires that the institutions neither endorse nor do they critique those papers, because at the end of the day, these are research papers.
That point is right. I mean, I agree with you. But point is that, whether institution will agree or not, fear should not work among the mind of the scholars. That is my point.
Yeah, that is true.
So Dr. Singh, if I was to get you in for this last question, I think because both of you have to, move to a certain thing. So I think what he is hinting at is that the freedom that should be given, freedom, to research, to write your paper, that freedom is essential, and scholars should be allowed to critique the government.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, nobody can doubt that. I mean, this is a unanimity amongst everywhere. So I think that the scholars should write what they wish to, but yes, it doesn't mean, remember, freedom of speech and expression also has certain limitations that we must keep in mind. So when you write, you must write responsibly. You must back your arguments with substantive clarity and substantive data. I think this paper has a lot of data, but again, it falls short of making the claim that it actually would have wanted to make. That's where I said it's more obscure, and it tries to confuse the people by creating sense of doubts. That is something that one should stay away from.
Since Dr. Singh, you said the paper has the data. So if it has the data, where do you think it fell short?
See, having the data does not necessarily mean that you end up saying something that open-ended. So it carries a lot of data from a lot of sources, and it only, it's trying to test the entire hypothesis on one ground, that's the McRoy thesis, right? And it says because it does not conform to McRoy thesis, therefore it might, look at the language, because it does not conform to McRoy thesis, therefore it might mean that the electoral outcome would have been manipulated. Now, there will always be a chance of deviation. There will always be a chance where arguments or data sets of the past may not lead you to the same result every time. So that is where I think the paper has been drafted in a way that that escape routes are open.
I mean, I'd like to just make one observation. Of course, if you want to really infer any argument based on the data, there could be always error. I mean, of course, but if your data your result is drawn based on the sufficient sample, let's say there are some standard sampling criteria, those criteria has been maintained, of course you can make certain argument with some kind of degree of conformity. I mean, usually, scholars make this kind of argument. So, of course, the subjective fact that this sample suggests this, it may be sufficient to claim for that. Of course, it depends on how the sample size, how, let's say, the overall population has been drawn in different groups that are very much depending. Scholars should also confess to some extent about those limitations as well. But other point is that when also statistically, let's say I'm also economist, I also know my limitation. That when you also try to develop alternate hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, we try to always prove hypothesis. If you don't get the hypothesis, you accept alternative hypothesis. That may be also the true for this paper as well. I don't know. I mean, I should confess that I haven't read it. I cannot justify or criticize the paper in that.
So thank you, gentlemen, for joining the Federal for today's discussion. Thank you once again.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.